Good afternoon and welcome to everyone and to another episode of Community Relations Corner, where we discuss issues of concern to New York's Jewish community and our friends and partners all over the New York metropolitan area. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, the JCRC-NY. On each episode of Community Relations Corner, we are joined by guests representing the political, religious, economic, and diverse community leadership in New York, many of whom I've gotten to know over the course of my tenure here at JCRC-NY. Together, we'll discuss current events impacting New York's Jewish community and its neighbors, as well as the state of our city, the state of our state, the state of the nation, and the state of the world. But first, a word from our sponsor, our wonderful sponsor. On each episode, we have a sponsor, and this episode, it's, of course, the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org for information about their Shabbat and holiday services, weekly Sunday school, and the beautiful spaces available for public rental. Once again, visit freesynagogueflushing.org. We thank the Free Synagogue for their sponsorship, and particularly for today's program, as I'm very, very excited to be joined by probably among the dearest friends that I have in the community relations world, and it's Reverend Jacques Degraff, prominent social justice activist and recipient recently of the Israeli Consulate Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Award, which is awarded to leaders in the Black community annually, a joint project of the Consulate, JCRC, and the Jewish National Fund and the JNF. Reverend Degraff, it's wonderful to have you here on the show with me. Welcome.
Hey, Romano, of course, it's great. A great day in civilization in New York to be with my dear friend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's first start for maybe a handful of people on this program who are viewing it who may not know as much about you as I do. So please tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your background, and how you ended up where you are now as a voice for social justice, as an activist, as a clarion call of ensuring balance within equilibrium within society.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me to be on the same platform with one of New York's icons for progress is a rare privilege, and I appreciate it and all the work that JCRC does to make a difference in New York. I'm a native New Yorker, the oldest of four brothers, and a little known fact that Michael and I are both from the Bronx and months apart in our birthdays. I won't say who's on which end, but I started out in the Bronx and started out with a tradition of activism, of trying to make a difference, which was kind of embedded in me from my Caribbean heritage. While I was in Dewitt Clinton High School, I had the opportunity to attend a program for gifted students in Atlanta. Now, you have to remember that in the mid-'60s, Atlanta to me was the same as Mississippi. And so the notion of going and spending a summer at Morehouse was somewhat terrifying but challenging at the same time. And at Morehouse Spelman, my instructor invited me to attend on a Sunday her worship service at her church. And because her father was the pastor, we got the red carpet treatment. She did not tell me that her brother, who was the preacher for that day, was Reverend Martin Luther King.
Wow.
It was a turning point in my life. I say this, Michael, that I went in as an Episcopalian, but the Baptist seed had been planted. And I had an opportunity, even as a teenager, to spend a time with Martin and recognize that would be a moment in which my life would change. That unforgettable moment pierced my adolescent excitement and said, something is happening here. Years later in college, I fancied myself wanting to go into the theater. And one of the things we had to do as interns, if you will, at National Black Theater was we had to go to a Black church. And the church that I chose was Canaan Baptist Church, which at the time I did not know that the pastor, Y.T. Walker, had been Martin Luther King's chief of staff.
That's in Harlem, correct?
Yes, in central Harlem. And it was Men's Day. Nikki Giovanni was the #1. She was a poet. She's still a poet. But her album with gospel music by LaBelle was the #1 album in the world at that time. And I felt something, and I hadn't felt that since I had been in this church in Atlanta. And so I stayed and became a Baptist, and was on the path to activism in many, many different forms. One of the things we recognized, and one of the reasons activism was attractive as opposed to politics, is politics was more constrained, but activism seemed to me to empower the individual. That no matter whether you were young or old, rich or poor, that you could make a difference if you adhered to and advanced some principle. And you know, over that time, watching school children face snarling dogs and fire hoses ignited something in me that has remained to this day. So that's how we got here, if you will. And along the way, there have been many journeys and battles. But one of the things that I would consider a really significant part in my journey was the trip that I made on my first mission to Israel through JCRC. I would call that one of the major turning points in my spiritual life, but also in the activism arc of my life, in that we had to learn, and we all learn and grow on our journey, that there's a reason that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. And so it's important to listen and observe, even when things are either alien or seem contrary to where you started out. And my trip to Israel was not just a mission to another country, it was to my holy land. And the hospitality that I experienced and the breadth of viewpoints that were presented were transformative. And everyone that I know who has been on that trip has remarked in the same way. But it changed my activism and my perspectives here. And it was a cornerstone to my friendship with Michael Miller.
Thank you very, very much. It certainly was being introduced to you even before that. We can talk about that a little bit later. Really made so much of a difference to me. You're the person that I generally reach out to have a conversation with when the going gets tough, and your insights are just so helpful and so it's crystal clear every time we have a conversation. I'm very, very grateful for that. I'm just curious before we go on, and this is a conversation between two friends, but where were you ordained?
I was ordained at Canaan Baptist Church. In fact, I was double. I'm the only person in Canaan's history who's double ordained. I was originally ordained as a deacon, and then years later, months later, I answered the call for ministry and walked as a minister, and eventually was ordained as a minister for social justice, actually.
Wow.
I'm the last person who Wyatt Walker ordained. When Wyatt Walker was installed at Canaan Baptist Church, he was installed by Dr. King. And 10 days later, Dr. King was assassinated. And so he had passed the baton on to Wyatt and others. And so I am in that lineage, if you will, in terms of my own ministry.
So speaking of the Black experience in New York and in America, so we in the Jewish community have a Jewish American Heritage Month, which is very nice. Our chief operating officer, who's the producer of this show, Noam Gilbord, has actually written for the White House, has written the proclamation for Jewish American Heritage Month more than once. But it doesn't seem to have the same resonance to Americans as broadly as Black History Month does. So what, Rev, and again, that's how we refer to you, it's not meant disparagingly, God forbid. What Rev, is the significance of Black History Month to you that you think is so meaningful to the Black community and others?
Well, when the original folk came here, we came in chains, and the Constitution defined us. When it finally got around to us, it defined us as 3/5 of a person. Court decisions, and and added to that perspective of less than human. And so the notion of celebrating the achievements of Black Americans was in itself a revolutionary paradigm shift. And so the reason I think that it lasts to this day is because the notion is that do our lives do matter? It's an affirmation, and it's also it's a declaration that whatever you learned in history, we know that our story has in many places and times been excluded, and so we have to tell our story, and we have to celebrate our achievements in adversity. And so Black History Month has had many. It started as Black History Week to acknowledge the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, expanded to the month as you know it. But in its permutations, if you will, it was the first this and the only that at one time. But now in this Black Lives Matter movement, it says that our lives matter. Again, it's an affirmation. And you may remember at a time in our recent past when the cry went out for Black power, and people started to say, are you reverse racist? And the hullabaloo went up. But it was simply an affirmation and a declaration that we're here and that we are claiming our full citizenship and equality. We don't want more than our share, but we want our fair share, and we expect and will fight to participate in the American dreams and aspirations.
Thank you. But this is Black History Month. February is Black History Month. How would you, Reb, how would you want to see Black History Month marked other than how it's marked today? Is there something which is missing, and who is it that should be leading this effort and to ensure that Black History Month is appropriately marked?
Well, I think the success of Black History Month, if I could use that expression, and to your question, is beyond observing the contributions of those in the past. And we salute everyone from Hank Aaron to John Lewis to Jackie Robinson and Kamala Harris. All of those are wonderful things. But for me, the more significance was to see so many young people marching in the streets in this past year that changed America and around the world. And the Jewish community was front and center as our allies and friends and brothers and sisters, standing up for justice. And so if we can begin to affirm the humanity of one another, that's the significance of Black History Month. So to put it in a context, I mentioned my first trip to Israel, but I was privileged through your friendship and support to lead a mission of Black clergy to Israel.
Yes, you did.
Black clergy, and it's significant because people don't understand that today less than 4% population are Christians. And so that's been to the strife and duress that has happened in the area. So many went despite their fears, and friendship and alliances happen when people build bridges to one another. And so JCRC literally put its money where its mouth is and opened their door and said, come, visit and learn and grow. And I think that is critical, because right now in America, we need friends. We need alliances. If I could just segue from January 6th, many people are on trials and follow-up and investigations about January 6th, and there's a lot of gnashing of teeth. But in our faith tradition, we talk about, in the season just before that, our Yuletide season, we talk about a North Star and those who follow the North Star. Well, I believe in America there was a North Star on January 6th, but it wasn't in Washington. The North Star was in a place called Georgia. And in Georgia, the paradigm and the chains of the past were broken when a Jewish son of immigrants and a Black man, preacher, stood together, worked together, and changed the arc of American and world history. The election of Ossoff and Warnock is going to change the course of American history. And I think that that's a harbinger of what happens when we work together and learn from one another.
Thank you. I only go back to my question about Black History Month. What should be done which currently isn't being done, or maybe what's being done is sufficient?
Well, I think, we've been a little hampered this year because of COVID, but I think it's important for each of us in our community to get out of our comfort zone and to learn more and be together across boundaries, if you will. We are communities in pain right now. One of the things that I think has become more prevalent or more obvious is the rise of anti-Semitism. The Jewish community was aware of it, but I don't think many in the Black community were aware of the significance or prevalence of it until Charlottesville. And on the news, it sounded like at first, if your ear was not attuned, you will not replace us. But that's not what they were saying. And when we understood that they were saying Jews will not replace us, and then we fast forward to January 6th and see Camp Auschwitz and 6MWE, that had a chilling effect that the same people, the same forces of darkness that hate in one community don't stop at the borders of our community. They're the same forces. And so I think to your question, that we have to recognize the common threats to our existential threats to our existence, but we also have to build bonds, personal bonds. And I'll give you an example. As chair of the New York State Attorney General's Black Jewish Clergy Roundtable, yes, we bring clergy from the Jewish community and clergy from the Black community to sit and to talk and to share. Our communities are in pain. COVID is racking our community, and anti-Semitism and other challenges are racking the Jewish community. We need to talk, and we need to build those bridges.
Yeah, we certainly do. We're going to get into COVID a little bit later in the program, but you opened the door, Rev, to BLM, to Black Lives Matter. And you and I have had quite a number of conversations about the movement. So there are two questions for you, which we've been hearing from our community, and some of the questions we have are ourselves. Who are the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, A, and then B, the Movement for Black Lives published a policy paper 5 years ago in 2016 that had some very strongly anti-Israel language in it. Does the Movement for Black Lives represent the Black Lives Matter movement?
We are dealing with a non-traditional, in terms of the National Action Network or the Urban League or the NAACP, we're dealing with a new phenomenon that reflects the thinking of young people and others in the 21st, at this point in the 21st century. Well, what do you mean? I mean that there are those who can now create a pop-up demonstration. They can produce 5,000 people in front of a police plaza in 5 hours. And our traditional organizations don't function in that same way. But their hierarchy and their process and their leadership structure, totally different. And that is, for many, frustrating, and it's challenging, because they say we don't have a president and executive secretary and those kinds of things. We have a different kind of horizontal leadership. A. B, there are different elements under the same umbrella of Black Lives Matter. So let me take a step back, because I think this is fundamental to the understanding of Black Lives Matter movement. When Black Power first came up, there were specific people associated with that call. There were specific organizations. The Black Lives Matter movement grew out of increasing frustration in the Black community to see individual after individual who was shot or that was a victim of police mistreatment. Not just the names that you're familiar with, but in every community, there were those who didn't find justice. And the cavalier or insensitive attitude that many felt that government experienced said that it created a groundswell that culminated in our lives matter. My mother's life matters. My next door neighbor's life matters. My grandchildren's lives matter. It's a fundamental assertion of our humanity. And so it attracted a broad cross-section of folks who would say, yes, I believe in Black Lives Matter. And the reaction was, well, blue lives matter. All lives matter. Are you a reverse racist? That's a terrorist group. And all we did was affirm our humanity. And so then when you drill down with these various permutations, there were those who reflected much narrower points of view towards Israel that exists in the broad Black community. And in some of our traditions, if you will, people did not repudiate those who they disagreed with. They just said that's not my view. So that I know has caused a fair amount of distress in the Jewish community, because it was perceived as the Black Lives movement is hostile to Israel. And I'm not one of those adherents. I believe that Black Lives Matter. I'm not a card-carrying member of any particular dimension of it, but the people who I know who are thought leaders and leaders and elected leaders and business leaders, I think adhere to the notion that Black Lives Matter, and that banner and that activism has created a surge of energy for fairness. As it relates to Israel, I think that there are dimensions of it that were ill-informed. Some of it was nearly anti-Semitic. Others of it was an honest, was an assertion in their minds of fairness for Palestinians. And so I'm one of those who believes you can be for human rights for Palestinians and the right for Israel to exist. I don't think that those are mutually exclusive ideas. And I think that the broad cross-section of the Black community feels that way.
Again, that's a very well articulated response to my question, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm sure our viewers are as well. But I just have to ask you the question again in the spirit of our relationship, but in this instance with other people listening in, is that the fact that it is horizontal leadership within BLM, this leaderless, in essence, movement can lead to what actually did happen in a number of cities, including here in New York, which was lawlessness, which was violence, and then there's no one to take responsibility for it. Might there be thought being given to establishing those structures, those vertical structures, which currently don't exist within BLM? A, and then B, on the Israel question, other than the Reverend Jacques Degraff and some others, might there be a reaffirmation like Dr. King would have done of the relationship between the Black community and the Jewish community and the state of Israel?
Well, the second part is a little easier, not easier, but the response comes quicker. That affirmation has already taken place in Georgia, and I think it's yes. that light exists. That light exists in New York with you and I, and it exists with the fact that we were able to take a mission, and there have been now, I know, other missions of clergy, Black clergy, to Israel and the ongoing relations of the alumni. So I think that that seed has blossomed, and I think that those conversations are going and have many dimensions. The first, however, is more troublesome. The Black Lives Matter movement is an adamant fact of life. And when people take the fringes and say, what about the violence? The people in the Black Lives Matter movement and those who share their view say, what about the violence against our people? What about the violence? And until and unless the Black Lives Matter movement is not only an assertion, it's a pursuit of justice. And under the pursuit of justice in New York City and beyond, unless and until that happens, to single out the aberrations in the various demonstrations. By and large, 90 to 95% of the millions of Americans who marched under the Black Lives Matter were not violent. And so we're not going to, I think it's a distraction, well-intentioned, but it's a distraction to point out the folks who acted out of hostility, another agenda, anger, vengeance, or what have you, when the police department, who we pay, our public official, have consistently across this country, there's been a drumbeat of violence against Blacks that has not been met with justice. And in every instance, it's the policeman's state of mind. The grand jury would not indict. The collective bargaining agreement allows the officer not to have to testify. And it is perceived as injustice against our community, and the community has had enough. And the big news is, I think, is that with the George Floyd killing, white America and our friends in the Jewish community have said, we have had enough. And we intend to march with you until this, and stand with you until this is resolved. And the issue of violence will go away when justice arrives.
Yeah, so you're right. We need to stand together to ensure that there is justice for all Americans, and inclusive of Black Americans who have been mistreated by law enforcement across the country, as has been documented. You and I, below the radar, have been involved in conversations with the New York Police Department. So can you share with us what you would like to see in terms of police reform? I assume, knowing you, that you're not in support of defunding the police, meaning emptying out the coffers of the police, but rather reforming the police. Are there specific reforms that you can share with us that you would like to see implemented in the city of New York? We are going to have a new mayor, and there's great probability that we're going to have a new police commissioner just within the next year, as of January 1st, 2022. So what would you like to see in the New York Police Department different than the NYPD of today?
Well, I think the failure of accountability, and this is not an issue of this commissioner or that commander, or it's the system is not working for us. And so I think we need a new system. And I think it starts with the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board. I think needs to have powers of investigation, subpoena powers, and punitive powers in instances of police misconduct. I don't think the police department is capable, and the perception in our communities is that they're incapable in the most egregious cases of making a difference. And so I think that ought to be taken out of the police department, but still within the law enforcement sphere, number one. Number two, I think that the collective bargaining agreement with the PBA needs to be re-looked at. When the Mayor de Blasio went to a police hospital and went to a funeral, and police officers got up and turned their backs on him, there's no other place that you can do that and disrespect your boss on a job. And yes, I believe in free speech, but I believe some people should have been terminated and let them sue their way back in. There's a disconnect in too many instances between actions and consequences. So in terms of what's happening in the community, there are many wonderful men and women in the police department who do sacrificial things, and we've seen them exercise patience and judgment, and that's what makes those who act out or misbehave or brutalize our citizens, that's what makes them stand out, because the majority of police officers do their job. The problem is the ones who are not doing their job are poisoning the well. Our community can't make a distinction between the person who the 90% good people and the bad apples. We keep hearing there are a few bad apples. Well, I don't know how many are a few, but there are enough that have made police relations strained with our community, and we can do better.
And who, Rev, is responsible for that? Is that going to be a decision made by the next mayor of the city of New York? Is that a decision for the New York City Council? Who should be held accountable for making those reforms, or should it be something internal to NYPD?
Well, I would like to see it come from City Hall with the kind of person that's selected as the next PCA. And I'm taking all the mayoral candidates at their word that they would replace the current PC, and that Dermot Shea is a good man in a very difficult position. Having said that, I think sometimes our city council, well-intentioned, can sometimes get out over their skis, and so I trust, and I want to hold one person accountable, and I think that should be the mayor.
Should be the mayor.
I'll give you an example. The city council, as you know, there are elements that are using their endorsements for potential candidates for the city council based on how do you stand on Israel. We don't want you to even go to Israel. And so I assume that some of those folk are going to end up on the city council. And so I frankly feel that the city council can sometimes be more ideological than practical. And so I trust the process that will produce a mayor who can come up with a commissioner and policies that will closely adhere to this pursuit of justice.
All right, thank you. I'm not going to ask you the question as to if there was one of the many candidates out there, and another one came in yesterday, and who knows going to come in tomorrow. But maybe we'll get that down the road when I have you back as a guest. But earlier, you referenced anti-Semitism, and there certainly has been another movement in this country which has been very, very troubling to us, if not actually threatening, and that's the white supremacy movement. So we recognize white supremacy as a clear and present danger to the Jewish community. Similarly, it is for the Black community. But that's just my view. Can you just share with us what your views are of white supremacists? I mean, you referenced January the 6th, but is beyond those individuals, lawless individuals, insurrectionist individuals who were in Washington, D.C., riding on the Capitol and in the Capitol. What does white supremacy mean to the Black community? And how are Jews within the Black community viewed within this struggle against white supremacy?
Well, I think that it's an evolving moment in America. Before January 6th, there was Michigan, where the state house was stormed, the governor was threatened, there were plans afoot to do dire things. Before Michigan, there was Charlottesville, and we see an escalation of hate. Before Charlottesville, there was Tree of Life, and then there was the slaughter in South Carolina. And so we see now the threat is growing. It's a clear path of escalation. It's a clear and present danger. I think for a time, Black folk saw our predicament, our circumstance in America through a limited lens. It has been expanded, and I think one of the dimensions of this situation is that to a Black American, it's a white folks, and so you have to know or understand anti-Semitism in Europe, where at the roots of anti-Semitism before the Holocaust, and then since the Holocaust. When you begin to understand that and recognize the pernicious level of anti-Semitism in America, that there are those who have always seen their Jewish brothers and sisters as other, just like they see us as other, just like they see Native Americans as other. But they now feel threatened. I think the most recent dimension that is critical to our understanding is that the white supremacist community mindset feels under siege itself. And like cornered snakes, they are striking out. And so we are all at risk in their hatred and the vitriol that they experience, that they are promulgating across the board. So I think the Black community sees that we have allies. They don't make a distinction about who they hate more. We're all hated, and they are locked and loaded in the communities that we know about. Gun dealers are running out of ammo. They are creating what to us sound like crazy lies, but that's their reality. They don't listen. They don't get the news from the same sources. They don't read the same books. And the President of the United States has used the full weight of his office to reinforce, to instigate, to agitate for our demise. We're clear on that. Others may not be. This is not like on the one hand and on the other hand. This is a clear and present danger to our survival in America. And so we have to stand together.
Yeah, but there's a new president in Washington now. Whether we agree with you or disagree with you, there's a new president in the White House. Is there confidence within the Black community that Joe Biden can make the changes that are necessary and take on the white supremacists as you've described them?
Well, I think that there's great enthusiasm for President Biden and for Vice President Harris. A historic pick. The first number of days that he has been in office and his transition have been marvelous signals. But I think right now we're really looking at Chuck Schumer and can you deliver? Can you deliver under these circumstances? Mitch McConnell, when he was in the minority, was still able to thwart Merrick Garland and block a whole lot of other things. Can you, now that we're in the majority, even in this narrow majority, can you deliver? Can you deliver on voting rights? Can you deliver on protecting us in terms of racial justice in America? Can you create a new climate? I know Nancy Pelosi, where she's coming from. The question is, can Schumer and the Democrats deliver? We went through a situation in the last, under President Obama, where one man stuck up the Democratic Party on affordable health care, Joe Lieberman. And now we're looking at Manchin from West Virginia, who seems to have his own agenda, regardless of what the rest of the Democratic Party says. So will we get a minimum wage? Will we get many of the reforms that are being considered? That's going to be Joe Biden's challenge. I think he's up to it. I think a lot of folk in the Black community, Black leadership community, are giving him, we're still in a honeymoon period, relatively speaking. He has our full faith and confidence. And this is really a larger question, Michael, I think is this. Can our democracy meet this moment? Where are the good Republicans? Everybody is not in the militia. Everybody is not a white supremacist. But if Liz Cheney is being run out of the party, and this woman from Georgia is being, the minority leader won't confront her, what happened to Bush and Dole and a variety of other Republicans? What happened to their backbone? And so that's what we are standing by looking at in this moment.
Yeah. There's so much that Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has on his plate, and you're correct, of course, that the question is how much can he deliver of all of the issues that are before him, and one of them is right before him at this moment, which is the COVID relief bill. And as everyone knows, the statistics have borne out that people of color have regrettably been shortchanged so far in terms of being vaccinated. What is it, Rev, that we are looking to collectively, that we're looking for government to do to ensure that Black and Latino and Asian, and I will include Jewish communities, inner city Jewish communities are receiving the vaccines that they should be receiving? What can government do to reverse this trend?
Well, first of all, government can get its act together. We really can't, and I have had respect for both the governor of New York and the mayor of New York, but we can't afford for them to be on different pages. It's a life and death situation, and we cannot afford dueling press conferences and dueling policy. We need, this is all hands on deck. The house is on fire. And so the first thing we can expect or call for is government to speak with one voice. And there's a role for all of us to play. One of the other things that we can do is the private sector's got to step up to the plate also and make a meaningful difference. Well, what do I mean? After January 6th, corporations said, you know what? That is a threat to our democracy. And they didn't say it, but it's a threat to our business model. We can't support people who support that. We're withdrawing our money. Well, we need the business community to say to our elected leaders, you need to get it together. We're willing to help and do this, that, or the other. But we can't stand on the sideline and see our workers jeopardized and see the market in which we function be the victim of a vacuum of solidarity and confusion. So I think that there's a role for the business community. And then the faith community, we've got to be given information. And as you know, and your listeners and viewers may know, that I'm part of an initiative, a national initiative for the Black church to be involved in combating COVID. And it started in 5 cities: Detroit, Newark, Atlanta, DC, and New York. Our national co-chairs are Reverend Calvin Butts and Reverend Al Sharpton. Each city has a chair. Raphael Warnock, the Reverend Senator, is the chair in Atlanta, and yours truly is the chair in New York. And we've identified churches in each city which will be dealing with testing and with vaccination. Now, the most important issue is the empowerment issue. We are going to take control of our own destinies by making right choices. You've been hearing, Michael, about one of the reasons for the hesitancy in the Black community is because of something like the Tuskegee experiment or Henrietta Lacks.
Yes.
No,
Yeah, that was my question for you. Yeah.
Yeah, the system, that happened a long time ago. It's in our DNA, but the reality is the system was failing us last January. The system has been failing. Our maternal mortality rate has been higher than our counterparts in other communities. The insensitivity and the racism in the New York and American healthcare system has created huge disparities. We've been mistreated, we've been neglected, and we've been abused by the healthcare system. So when people say, believe the science, it's the science we believe, it's the scientists we have problems with. And unless and until the system begins to adjust to the needs of our community, then we are going to be mistrustful of anything that comes out of that system.
But define for us what you mean by the needs of our community. What are those needs which are not currently being met by the scientists?
Okay, the cultural competence. I'll give you an example.
Please.
A woman is a pregnant woman is in difficulty, in pain, and asks for painkillers. And the medical culture is, you just want some drugs, or you don't need that painkiller. This story has been repeated over and over and over again. The stories throughout our communities of people who went to the emergency room presenting with symptoms of COVID, and you don't need to be admitted. Why don't you go home? And which they did, and that's where they died. The stories are legion, and in one instance, it could be talked about, you don't have a good bedside manner. Why? Because you don't relate to us as human beings. And so the medical community has to own the fact that there needs to be reforms. There's an AMA that everybody talks about when talking about healthcare policy. Well, in America, we have an AMA, but there's also an NMA. And why is there a National Medical Association? Because for a long time, we weren't admitted into the AMA. There's an American Bar Association. Well, there's also a National Bar Association for the same reason, and on down the line. Systemic racism is real, and our experience of it is real. So it's not hesitancy in the Black community. It's a resistance based on mistreatment and failure. And that's shown to be across the health disparities, that the health outcomes in our communities are different than everybody else's community. So when people come up with a new strategy or a new plan, or we developed a vaccine in warp time, we say like, we never developed an AIDS vaccine after 35 years. So now you develop this vaccine in warp speed, and now you want us to take it. Well, based on what way we've been treated by this system, we'll wait a little while. That's what we're hearing.
Yeah, healthcare disparities. I've mentioned this before on the program, is at JCRC, through our Intergroup Relations Division, our Center for Community Leadership, led by very capably by Rabbi Bob Kaplan. They've established a Jewish an interfaith coalition on healthcare disparities, initially in the borough of Brooklyn. But we expect, with the success of that coalition, to spread to the other boroughs and counties as well. But we've heard so much about healthcare disparities during this pandemic. Is there a specific role that should be played today by Black organizations in New York? Here it is, JCRC is stepping in and creating this interfaith coalition on healthcare disparities. Who should our viewers know are the leading Black organizations in the New York area to take on this matter?
Well, first of all, I can't let that moment go by without acknowledging the model that Bob and JCRC has established. And it's what I call walk a mile in my shoes. We're not going to get this just by having a couple of meetings. We have to have a commitment to walk together, to be together, and to listen together. And I think if there's a secret to JCRC's success, is the willingness to do that and to have leaders who make distinctions and who make relationships with people outside of the Jewish community. Having said that, Black organizations, a number of the organizations, the initiatives that I described, the Choose Healthy Life initiative, grew out of the Black National Leadership Commission on AIDS. It took the model that existed 20, 30 years ago to combat AIDS, and now it's coming, been transformed by its founder, Deborah Fraser House, to address this issue, which is not just about COVID, it's about health disparity and making healthy choices. And the issue has been cultural competence. We're not just talking science, we're talking our faith. So we go from Deuteronomy, that's where we got choose healthy life. Choose God so that you and your seed might choose life so that you and your seed may live, Deuteronomy. That's in our faith, right? Then you combine that with the science. And so this Choose Healthy Life, there are the 100 Black men who are active. There are organizations and individuals who have taken leadership roles, particularly in the Northern Manhattan. Congressman SBI has brought together a consortium of organizations around Columbia University and Columbia Medical School to bring communities together. One of the terrible offshoots of this time, it's affecting the Jewish community, the Black community, is our mental health. We're sitting in our silos in front of our screens, but we can't go to worship together. We can't grieve together. We have food challenges, and individuals are manifesting, fragile individuals and healthy individuals. Alcoholism is up, domestic violence is up, loneliness is up, and it's taking a tremendous impact on our young people. Can't go to graduation, can't go to the prom, can't go to the movie theater, can't go bowling. And so this is weighing. And so when we see the upticks in gun violence, when we see the uptick in irritation incidents and madness, it's growing because we can't come together. So these are great challenges, Michael, that we can face together.
Yeah, well, I hope that all those challenges are significant and rise to the top of our agendas. The gun violence issue is just so troubling after all of the successes that have been achieved through community policing. For there to be a marked uptick in gun violence. I just saw the other day that there was a gun buyback that was organized by the Attorney General, Letitia James, whom you serve as the co-chair of the Black Jewish Clergy group, and just look at the tens of guns that are turned in, and there's so many more that are out there.
And Michael,
what else again?
One of the things that even as those guns are being turned in, there have been incidents and episodes in the same community of people being shot and victimized by gun violence, of incidents where, oh, that wasn't the target, but they're just as dead. So one other organization that I would be remiss in not mentioning is the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, which has come up with a model on a bi-weekly basis that the representatives of elected officials, institutions, businesses come together on a bi-weekly basis and share. So you have representatives from the police department and Harlem Hospital and the Apollo Theater and Schomburg Library and the Tenants Association all speak on a regular basis about this crisis that we're going through. And it's an extraordinary example of a community responding to a crisis.
Yeah, no, I agree that what the chamber is doing is really so important. We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to wait until the end to have a conversation with you about Black-Jewish relations. You and I have been on a number of panels and dealing with this issue. There's a film, Share Legacies, that we were both interviewed for, and we've been on panels about that as well, about the alliance during the civil rights movement. But that alliance unraveled after the civil rights movement achieved its initial goal of the civil rights legislation back in the 60s. And then we were, rather than partners, we were rivals. What is it beyond my relationship with you and your relationship with me, and hopefully serving as role models for what should be happening between leadership in the Black and Jewish communities, particularly religious, spiritual leadership between the two communities? What should we be doing today to try to rebuild that relationship that during the 1960s was so strong?
Well, I think you can have to build a house from the bottom up. And there was a national movement at that time for a very evident goals. Right now, I think I don't want to say small ball, but we have to work on building relationships on the level of congregation sharing with one another. It's interesting that what a difference a year makes, but the year before last in January, there were a number of anti-Semitic incidents in New York City area, culminating with the machete hacking just outside of New York. And the Jewish community was hurting. You and I spoke, and we gathered a group of Black leaders. You didn't ask for it. You said we're hurting. And so we had a group of Black leaders who did what? Who on the first Sabbath day in the year went to worship with the Jewish congregation.
As you did, and so greatly appreciated at the Lincoln Square Synagogue.
Well, the point is that we understood that we have to go where the pain is. And that model, I think, is important now, and then build from there. We cannot just go to Zoom meetings. We've got to really interact with one another. And that's a new level of challenge. And we have to be candid. We have to see beyond the stereotypes in our comfort zone, that we need to listen and hear one another's pain. We need to also do some constructive things jointly together. And in Brooklyn, it might be different than what we do in the Bronx, and in Harlem might do something different than we do in Queens. But we have to make a commitment that we're in this together, and we have to do things together, use our resources in a combined way. That also, we ought to see each other as partners, not supplicant and benefactor.
Right. So you're correct, but what should we be partnering on? And I think that one of the areas of partnership, which you and I certainly had discussed many times, is combating hate. We've talked about it on this program, of combating racism as we combat anti-Semitism, as we combat racism. The Jewish community was really on its heels back in January of a year ago, as you described, and we organized the march across the Brooklyn Bridge with that you're seeing behind me in the virtual image, that attracted tens of thousands of people of all different stripes, of all different faiths, of all different ethnicities. And yes, the majority of them, the strong majority of them were members of the Jewish community. But the messages that were delivered were not only delivered by members of the Jewish community, were delivered by people of all different faiths. It's a campaign, it's a crusade against hate, isn't it?
That's the clear and present danger that we can't take our eye off the ball. On a fundamental level, these folks have guns. And they get treated differently by the police than we do. And so they are a growing threat in America. They're unrepentant. they are angry, they're violent. And so on a very immediate level, we have to combat them. We have to work with law enforcement, and we have to also rely on our faith. We can't leave that out of the conversation. We have to rely on our faith and the common dimensions that we have of our faith. We both believe in Moses.
Yeah, and Moses believed in God, and therefore the same God. And I just want to end on that positive note and carry it one step further for our viewers, or many viewers, is just to let them know that Reverend Degraff is held in the highest regard by the elected officials in New York, including appointed officials, including the New York Police Department. When his voice is heard, it is listened to. I still remember a conversation that you and I had when we were sitting together on a news channel's board years ago about the word schmooze. So again, it's in the vernacular in New York. I'm going to have a schmooze, as everybody thinks that schmoozing actually means talking. And schmooze is based on the Hebrew word shin mem ayin, lishmoa, to hear. So it's not a matter of talking, it's a matter of listening. And when I can tell you that whenever Reverend Jacques Degraff speaks, people do listen. And it's really been a tremendous pleasure for me to have my dear friend and partner, as the title of the show is Walking as Brothers. So my brother from another mother, Reverend Degraff, the Rev, on the show with me. And I'm going to give him a last word. He's itching to have that last word already, I know. But before I give him the last word, I just want to thank our terrific sponsor for this program. And that, of course, is the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn about a wide array of programming and the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rent after COVID. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn more about Shabbat and holiday services and weekly Sunday school. Once again, visit freesynagogueflushing.org. And a regular shout out to their president, Ed Schauder, who is a member of our board of directors at JCRC, to their cantor and executive director, Alan Bravo, to the rabbi, Jeffrey Gale, to my team, the 3Gs. We have Noam Gilboard and Rebecca Grossman and Jennifer Glick. And with all those thank yous, I'm going to turn it back to our very special and honored guest today for a last word before I close. Rev?
When my brother and partner initiated this program, I sat in my tent door waiting for my invitation. And over 20 episodes went before it came. And so I felt honored that I said, okay, I'm kicking off Black History Month. They were holding me back for this moment. And I appreciate all the work that JCRC has done and continues to be the #1 bridge builder in New York City. There is no community that you can go into that their work has not been evident. And in such a time as this, we need bridge builders and we need partners. I'm encouraged by the history, our history together. One of the highlights of my life was to be honored by the State of Israel through the Consulate General, the JCRC, and the Israel Fund with its Martin Luther King Award, to be able to say to my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren that if you go to the Holy Land and hang a left on this place, you'll see a tree that's been planted with our name on it to commemorate our work. And this work, to me, is now more important than ever, and the partnership with Michael Miller is more important. But it may seem to many that there's a dark time in America, but I still see that North Star. I see the evidence of it in all the work that our communities are doing and moving forward. And I'm convinced and I'm convicted that the path that we have started on is still the path to a sunshine and a bright day, and that together, as we do these things, that the best is yet to come. God bless you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Rev. Thanks for those very kind words, and back at you. My sister just texted me, "You'll never walk alone," and it's good to know that I have that partner. And one of the messages on the chats came in from a woman by the name of Cynthia. Thank you. I wish this presentation had been 3 hours. It just zoomed by. And I can let Cynthia know that the Rev and I, over the course of a month, certainly do speak for more than 3 hours. We have a lot of agendas that we work on together, and it's just such a delight, such a pleasure, and such a privilege to have this relationship, and to have Reverend Jacques Degraff on as a guest on Community Relations Corner. Thank you so much, and we look forward to other programs during Black History Month. We got another message from Claudia. Excellent talk. I love all of that. And let's continue the conversation. And Rev, we're going to have you back, maybe at the 42nd. No, I don't know, whatever it's going to be. Take care, everybody. Shalom. Have a terrific month. This month has the festival of Purim, the wonderful Jewish holiday, which we'll talk about at another time. Shalom to all, and have a good day, a good week, and a good month. Bye-bye.